Renata had always believed that her life was perfect. Her marriage to Marcus, a caring and generous man, seemed to be the example of a strong and happy relationship. People around them admired them, their friends commented on the harmony they transmitted, and their relatives saw them as the role model. In everyone's eyes, they were the ideal marriage. Dinners at their home were always carefully organized, every celebration was impeccable, and even their vacation together seemed like something out of a dream. For Renata, it was all a reflection of her hard work and dedication, of the way she and Marcus complemented each other in every aspect of their lives. On the other hand, there was Carolina, her best friend, her confidant since university days. Carolina was that person in whom Renata trusted with her eyes closed. There was no secret or thought that Renata did not share with her. After all, they were almost like sisters. Carolina was a constant visitor in his home, a familiar and comfortable presence for both of them. Renata considered her part of his family, and Marcus saw her that way too, or at least that's what Renata believed. What Renata didn't know, however, was that, behind that facade of sincere friendship, something dark and hidden was germinating. Over time, Marcus had begun to feel restless, stuck in a routine that seemed too quiet to him. Although he loved Renata, he felt an absence of something, a spark, an emotion that he could not define. That emptiness was filled with contradictory thoughts and repressed desires that he never dared to share. One day, while Renata was busy with a work event, Marcus received an unexpected message from Carolina. The notification from his phone vibrated gently on his desk, interrupting his concentration. It was a casual message, or at least it seemed so at first glance. "What if we meet for coffee today? Just you and me. I have so many things to tell you." Marcus, intrigued, paused for a moment, considering whether it was appropriate or not. It was not common for them to see each other alone, since they were always in the company of Renata. However, something in that invitation tempted him, a dangerous idea of doing something out of the ordinary. After a few seconds of hesitation, he replied, "Sounds good. Let's go." When he arrived at the cafe, he saw Carolina sitting at a secluded table, waiting for him. As he approached, he noticed that she was watching him with a smile that seemed different, more intense. They sat down and started talking about trivial topics at first, but the conversation quickly took on a different tone. Between laughter and memories, Marcus began to notice something different in the way Carolina looked at him, a kind of admiration that made him feel special, different. He, without realizing it, began to reciprocate with looks and comments that bordered on the forbidden, and soon, that friendly meeting was transformed into something more. As they talked, Carolina leaned toward him, getting close enough that their eyes met with an intensity Marcus hadn't felt in years. "I've always admired the way you look at life," Carolina told him in a whisper, her eyes fixed on him. "Renata is very lucky." Marcus felt a strange warmth in his chest. It wasn't something he expected to hear, but it wasn't something he wanted to stop either. There was a brief silence, charged with emotions. To break it, Marcus looked away and asked, as if casually, "What about you? Are you happy?" Carolina sighed, fiddling with the strap of her purse, as if she were pondering the answer. "I think so, but sometimes I feel like something is missing. I don't know if it's the excitement or the intensity one expected to have in my life." That confession resonated deeply with Marcus, who also felt that emptiness, but had never had the courage to put it into words. Carolina was telling him out loud what he had been feeling in silence for a long time, and that connection brought them together in a way they both knew was dangerous. The conversation continued, both talking about their lives, their dreams, what they needed, while the tension between them increased with each word. When the coffee was over, they both knew something had changed. The drive back home was a moment of silence and reflection for Marcus. As she drove, she tried to ignore the weight of guilt that was beginning to grow inside her, but Carolina's words, that lack of intensity in her life, kept resonating in her mind. From that day on, a new desire began to beat in him, and although he knew that what he was doing was wrong, the risk gave him an emotion that he had not felt in a long time. In the days that followed, Marcus and Carolina continued to see each other, first in cafes, then in bars, and eventually in hotel rooms. What had started as a curiosity quickly morphed into a secret romance. Every encounter with Carolina was a mixture of adrenaline and danger, something that Marcus no longer found at home. With each step he took in that direction, he moved a little further away from Renata, who, without suspicion, continued to trust him and her best friend. Renata, meanwhile, remained oblivious to the growing betrayal unfolding before her very eyes. For her, Carolina and Marcus were her dearest people, the pillars of her life. She spent afternoons with Carolina, planning events and laughing together, while Marcus sank deeper and deeper into the darkness of his secret. Renata would never imagine that her best friend was taking away something much more valuable than her friendship. The days after the first one-on-one meeting between Marcus and Carolina were a mix of intense emotions for both of them. On the one hand, guilt began to set in, silently but constantly. Marcus felt like he had crossed a line from which there was no turning back, and even though he knew what he was doing was wrong, every thought about Carolina dragged him even further into that clandestine relationship. It was a contradictory feeling of excitement and danger that he could not find in his life with Renata. Carolina, for her part, also felt a mixture of feelings. He knew that his friendship with Renata was something sacred, something he should never have put at risk. But every time he was with Marcus, he forgot that commitment and let himself be carried away by the emotion of living something forbidden. Thus, the betrayal began to envelop them in a web of lies that only grew with each encounter. What started as a chance meeting in a cafe soon turned into secret dates, and the two could no longer stop. Renata, meanwhile, did not suspect anything. For her, her life remained the same, with her loving husband and best friend always nearby. I had never noticed any red flags, because I trusted Marcus and Carolina completely. She even felt grateful that they both got along so well, considering them almost like brothers. On one occasion, Renata told Marcus that she was thinking of making a special dinner to celebrate her next birthday, and without hesitation, she asked Carolina for help to plan a surprise. Renata thought there was no better person to help her organize something so meaningful. Marcus, hearing Renata mention the party and Carolina's involvement, felt a chill on his back. The thought of seeing his wife and lover working together somehow made him feel trapped, as if the web of lies was tightening around him. Despite that growing guilt, Marcus didn't stop. He decided to keep up appearances, keep pretending that everything was fine, and let Renata believe in his perfect life. Encounters with Carolina became more frequent and, over time, riskier. First, they met in coffee shops, then in bars, and eventually they came to rent hotel rooms to be together without being seen. Marcus felt that every time he was with Carolina, he re-experienced the spark of youth, that emotion he had lost in his daily routine. It was a feeling that filled him with adrenaline and made him feel alive, as if each encounter was a secret adventure. On the other hand, Renata noticed that Marcus was a little different, but she attributed those changes to work or the stress of daily life. She trusted him so much that she didn't think much of him. One afternoon, while they were at home, she noticed that Marcus spent a lot of time looking at his phone and smiling from time to time. "Who is it?" he asked curiously, trying to sound casual. Marcus, without looking up, quickly replied, "Nothing important, just the task force." Renata smiled and let the comment pass, but something inside her began to unsettle. That little spark of intuition that everyone has began to flicker inside her, a slight discomfort that she couldn't understand. However, his trust in Marcus and Carolina was so solid that he preferred to ignore that feeling and continue with his normal life. Days later, when Renata was calmer, Marcus received an unexpected message from Carolina. "See you tonight? I have a new place I want to show you." Marcus hesitated for a moment, but eventually agreed, not knowing that this encounter would mark another point of no return in their forbidden relationship. The night was cold and quiet when they met at the discreet bar Carolina had chosen. They both sat at a secluded table, surrounded by the noise of music and the murmur of other customers' conversations. The tension between them was palpable, a mixture of excitement and fear. Carolina, with a captivating look, took Marcus' hand on the table and smiled at him. "Did you ever think we'd be here, you and I, like this?" Marcus shook his head, speechless to answer, but his silence said it all. As the night wore on, the connection between them grew deeper and deeper. They talked about their dreams, their fears, what they expected from life, as if they were building an intimacy that went far beyond the friendship they once had. It was as if every word they exchanged brought them even closer together, breaking down barriers that once existed. When the evening was over, they both knew they could no longer stop. They made their way to the hotel Marcus had booked for them, aware that they were crossing a definitive line. The guilt they both felt at first slowly disappeared, replaced by the emotion of the forbidden, of experiencing something that was wrong, but at the same time made them feel alive. At dawn, while Carolina slept next to him, Marcus began to feel the weight of his betrayal. He looked at the ceiling, his thoughts full of contradictions and a feeling of emptiness. On the one hand, he wanted to continue with this adventure that made him feel young, full of life. On the other hand, he knew that with each step, he was irretrievably moving away from Renata and the life they had built together. Renata, meanwhile, continued at home, convinced that her husband was busy with work matters, and hoping that the birthday surprise she had planned for him would be memorable. What she didn't know was that the real surprise that fate had in store for her would be devastating. As the days went by, Renata began to notice subtle changes in Marcus. They weren't drastic or obvious transformations, but small details made her uncomfortable, as if something invisible was out of place. Marcus seemed to be always distracted, absorbed in his thoughts. He no longer showed the same enthusiasm when talking to her, and on the few occasions when they laughed together, he seemed to do so with a distance that she could not understand. One night, while they were having dinner, Renata dared to ask him directly if everything was okay. "Are you okay, love?" "I notice you different," she said, trying not to sound worried. Marcus, surprised, looked at her briefly before turning his attention back to his plate. "Yes, of course, it's just the work. You know, the usual stress," she replied casually, but her evasive tone and lack of eye contact set off an alarm in Renata. She wanted to believe that it was just work, that her intuition was playing tricks on her. But that persistent uneasiness did not disappear. Renata remembered the attentive and affectionate man she had met, the one who always shared everything with her, even the things that worried him. However, this time there was a barrier between them, one that she couldn't get through. Still, he decided to ignore their doubts, convincing himself that it was just a passing phase. The following week, Renata was going through some photos on her phone when she thought about sending one to Marcus. He took his cell phone and noticed, to his surprise, that he had changed the password. It was an insignificant detail, or so he wanted to believe, but Marcus had never had any secrets with her, let alone on something as trivial as the phone. He tried to convince himself that it must be because of work issues or some new company security policy, but an uncomfortable thought took root in his mind. Why had something they always shared changed? Days later, Renata had to go to Marcus' office to leave him some documents that he had forgotten at home. When he arrived, he noticed that the door was ajar and heard a familiar laugh coming from inside. It was the laughter of Carolina, her best friend. Renata stopped in her tracks, surprised to hear her in that context. The situation was not entirely abnormal, since Carolina also had certain work contacts in common with Marcus, but there was something in his tone that made her uncomfortable. Renata quietly approached the door and listened to a brief fragment of the conversation. "Shouldn't you be with Renata now?" asked Carolina jokingly, accompanying her words with a light laugh. "She thinks I'm in a meeting," Marcus replied, his voice sounding too relaxed, too confident. That answer made Renata's heart begin to pound, as if there was already something to suspect, something she preferred not to confirm. His body reacted before his mind. Without thinking twice, he pushed the door open and walked in. There, in front of his eyes, was the scene he had never imagined. Carolina sitting in the corner of Marcus's desk, leaning toward him in an intimate, knowing way, while he stood beside her, her hands in his pockets and an expression he didn't recognize. The silence that filled the room was deafening. Carolina, visibly uncomfortable, got up immediately, trying to compose herself. Marcus, pale and white-faced, took a step towards Renata, as if to explain himself, but he could not find the words. "Renata," he began to say, but he lost his voice when he saw the pain in his wife's eyes. Renata felt as if the ground disappeared under her feet. Emotions crowded in his chest and his breathing became difficult. He tried to speak, but the lump in his throat was so strong that he could barely mutter, "I forgot some documents," his voice trembling, trying not to collapse right there. He put the papers on the table, looking at neither Marcus nor Carolina. She felt betrayed by the two people she trusted most in the world. As he left the office, tears began to roll down his cheeks. "I couldn't stop them, and I didn't want to." He got into his car and, once inside, let out all the pain he had been holding back. His mind was in chaos, trying to process what he had just seen. It was as if his world had fallen apart in a matter of seconds. The man with whom she had shared her life, and the friend she had considered a sister, had betrayed her in the lowest possible way. He drove aimlessly for a while, trying to calm down, but the images of Marcus and Carolina together kept repeating in his head. "I needed to talk to someone I could trust." Without thinking twice, he went to his sister, Sophia's. Sophia had always been her support in difficult times, and this time, Renata knew she needed her more than ever. When she arrived, Sophia opened the door and saw her destroyed. "Renata, what happened?" she asked alarmed, hugging her immediately. Renata could not answer instantly. "I was still trying to take in what I had discovered." After a few minutes of crying and silence, he finally told her, his voice breaking, "Marcus and Carolina, they are together." Sophia's face went from surprise to anger in a matter of seconds. "What? Are you saying that, then Marcus and Carolina?" he repeated, as if he needed to confirm something so unthinkable. Renata nodded, her eyes still filled with tears. "I saw them today, in their office." They denied nothing. Sophia took a deep breath, trying to control the anger she felt. "I'm going to kill them," he muttered, clenching his fists. But Renata, still in shock, looked at her and shook her head. "It's not worth it, Sophia. I don't know what to do. My whole life is over in an instant." Sophie, softening her tone, took her hand firmly. "No, Renata, your life is not over. They may have betrayed you, but you are much stronger than that. Let's get through this together, do you hear me? I'm here for you. Right now, what you need is to take care of yourself. You are not alone." Renata, though devastated, felt her sister's comfort. "I knew Sophia was right, but the wound was still too fresh, too painful. There was a lot to process, many unanswered questions, but, for now, she could only afford to cry. She clung to her sister and let sadness consume her, aware that this night was only the beginning of a long and painful journey to recovery. The weeks that followed Renata's discovery were a whirlwind of emotions. There were days when she woke up feeling strong, determined to leave behind pain and betrayal. Others, on the other hand, were in overwhelming sadness, struggling to understand how the two people closest to her had been able to stab her in the back. For years, she had blindly trusted Marcus and Carolina, building a life based on trust and love, only to see it all fall apart in an instant. Renata had tried to avoid Marcus as much as possible. Every time he tried to get closer, he shielded himself with excuses not to face reality. She didn't feel ready to talk to him, to listen to his justifications or any attempt to explain himself. Just the thought of seeing his face made her relive the pain of that betrayal. However, one rainy afternoon, while he was at home trying to find some peace in the routine, he heard the sound of the door. He didn't need to look to know who he was. The key turned in the lock and Marcus went in. He was soaked, his face downcast, as if he were also living his own inner torment. Renata stood motionless on the sofa, holding a cup of coffee, without even looking directly at him. "Renata, we need to talk," Marcus said in a low, almost pleading voice. She remained silent, staring at her cup as if that might prevent the conversation that was to come. However, after a long sigh, she decided that perhaps it was time to face him, to listen to what he had to say, although she feared that this would only deepen the pain even more. "Talk about what, Marcus? About how you betrayed me to my best friend? Or about how you were able to lie to me day after day?" replied Renata, with a mixture of sadness and anger in her voice. Marcus slowly approached, not quite knowing how to approach the situation. "I know I've hurt you, Renata. I know this is unforgivable, but things between us have not been working for a long time. I feel like we lost that spark that united us," he said, trying to justify his betrayal. Renata looked at him incredulously. Anger began to boil inside him. "They didn't work? Is that what you think? That the problem was that there was no spark anymore? Because I was here, every day, trying to build a life with you, while you were too busy looking for thrills in someone else," he replied, his voice rising with each word. Marcus hung his head, visibly shaken, but still trying to defend his decision. "It's not just about emotions, Renata. I fell in love with Carolina," she confessed, as if by saying it out loud the weight of guilt became more real. Renata felt as if those words hit her in the chest. Although he already suspected that the feelings between them went beyond a simple attraction, hearing him say that he was in love with Carolina was like a dagger piercing his heart. Sadness and anger mingled inside him, struggling to dominate his reactions. "So, that's it, then. You have chosen Carolina over our life together," he murmured, almost in a whisper, his eyes full of tears that he refused to drop. "Marcus, I've given you everything, my trust, my love, years of my life. And this is what I get in return." Marcus took a step toward her, but Renata raised a hand to stop him. "You have nothing else to do here. I want you to go," he said in a firm voice, managing to maintain his composure despite the trembling in his legs. She felt she must let her dignity guide her actions, even when the pain threatened to overflow. "Oh, Renata, please. I don't want us to end up this way," Marcus pleaded, looking for one last chance at redemption, as if he could somehow save what was left of their relationship. But Renata was determined. "And how did you expect it to end, Marcus? Do you think I can forget what you did, just turn the page and move on? No, Marcus, this is over. You have destroyed everything we had the day you decided to deceive me," he replied, with a tone that made it clear that there was no turning back. Marcus, defeated, took a deep breath and realized that there was nothing he could say anymore. With a barely audible whisper of "I'm sorry," he made his way to the door, gathering some of his belongings while Renata stood in the living room, listening to the echo of his footsteps. Before leaving, Marcus stopped at the door and looked at her one last time, hoping perhaps for a sign of forgiveness, but Renata didn't look back at him. When she was finally left alone, Renata felt the weight of loneliness take hold of her. She slid to the floor, leaning her back against the couch, and let the tears flow freely. He had been strong in front of Marcus, but now, in the privacy of his home, the pain was unbearable. It was as if she was saying goodbye not only to him, but to everything they had shared, to the dreams and promises they had once had. In the following days, Renata tried to move forward, not to let herself be overcome by sadness. She knew she needed to rebuild her life, but the road was harder than she had imagined. Everything in the house reminded him of Marcus, every corner was a testament to his betrayal. Even when she was with her sister Sophia, who had been by her side at every turn, she felt that a part of her had been broken in a way that no one else could understand. Sophia, worried about her sister, visited her every day, trying to make her laugh or at least get her out of the house. One afternoon, while they were walking in the park, Sophia tried to cheer her up. "Renata, I know this is difficult, but you can't get caught up in the pain. You are much stronger than you think. Sometimes the people we love let us down, and it's in those moments that we discover our true strength." Renata listened to her sister silently, trying to find comfort in her words. I knew Sophia was right, but the emptiness inside her was deep. Marcus and Carolina's betrayal had left her without strength, and she felt that she was beginning a battle for which she did not yet feel ready. That day, Renata made a decision. Although the pain was still intense and sadness continued to consume her, she knew that she could not remain forever in that state. She decided, little by little, to begin to rebuild herself, to find in herself the strength she had always had, even if she sometimes forgot it. I knew the road wouldn't be easy, but at least I had taken the first step. As the weeks went by, Renata began to realize that she needed a profound change to be able to move forward. After what happened, every corner of his house was a constant reminder of the betrayal. Marcus and Carolina's memories haunted her, making her relive over and over again the moment her world collapsed. But she knew she had to find a way to rebuild her life, to rise from the ashes and rediscover who she was beyond the pain. One night, while going through old photographs on his computer, he came across an album he hadn't seen in years. They were photos from when I took ceramics classes. The smile on his face in those images was different, light, authentic. She remembered that time as a time when she felt free and at peace with herself, before the routine of marriage and responsibilities completely absorbed her. The feeling of molding the clay in his hands, of creating something unique with each piece, was a passion he had completely forgotten. Sophia, who was sitting next to her on the sofa, noticed the sparkle in her sister's eyes. "What are you seeing?" she asked, peering curiously at the screen. Renata showed him the photos and sighed. "They were from when I took ceramics classes. It was something I loved to do. I don't know why I left him," she replied with a slight melancholy smile, as if remembering that part of herself also recalled the freedom she felt back then. Sophia looked at her with a mixture of understanding and determination. "Well, why don't you come back? Maybe that's what you need now, something just for you. Something you can focus on without thinking about Marcus, without thinking about Carolina. Only in yourself," she said firmly. Renata hesitated for a moment, but her sister's words echoed in her mind. It was true that she needed something to take her away from painful memories, something that would give her a new purpose. After thinking about it some more, he decided it was worth a try. Together they searched online for a pottery studio in town and found one that offered a beginner's course that started the following week. Without thinking too much, Renata signed up. It was the first decision in a long time she made thinking only of herself, and that sense of autonomy filled her with unexpected hope. On the day of the first class, Renata entered the studio with a mixture of nerves and excitement. He hadn't sat in front of a ceramic wheel in years, and he worried he had lost his touch. However, as soon as she began to work with clay, the memories of those days came back to her, and she quickly felt at home. It was as if time had not passed. The feeling of creating something with his own hands, of molding the clay and shaping it, reminded him that, like clay, his life could also be shaped and transformed. The hours in the studio became a refuge for Renata. During those classes, I could forget the pain, the resentment, and the sadness. There was only her and the clay, and every piece she created was a reminder of her strength. After several weeks, I had already finished several small pieces: bowls, plates, small vases. Each one was unique, and each one represented a step in her healing process. One afternoon, as I was finishing a class, the instructor came over and admired one of the pieces I had finished. You have talent, Renata. Your pieces have a very special style, as if each one tells its own story, he told her with an approving smile. Renata, surprised by the compliment, felt a new feeling grow inside her. It was as if, for the first time in a long time, someone saw something more in her than the suffering she had gone through. That simple but sincere comment made him realize that he had something valuable to offer the world, something that didn't depend on anyone else. That night, while having dinner with Sophia, he shared his idea with her. I've been thinking, maybe I could dedicate myself to ceramics in a more serious way. Not just as a hobby, but really do something with it. Maybe one day I could even have my own studio, he said with a mixture of shyness and excitement, fearing that his idea would sound far-fetched. Sophia, with a proud smile on her face, took his hand. Renata, that would be wonderful. You are so talented, and if this is what makes you happy, then you need to move on. You don't know how glad I am to see you like this, talking about your dreams again, she replied enthusiastically. Inspired by her sister's support, Renata began researching how she could take the next step. She enrolled in a local entrepreneurship course, where she learned about marketing, management, and business strategies. There, she met other women who, like her, were looking for independence and a purpose of their own. Listening to their stories of struggle and overcoming gave her even more strength to keep going. It was in that course that Renata met Alejandro. He was a man with a warm smile and a calm disposition, always ready to help his classmates. Unlike Marcus, Alexander was not trying to impress anyone, it was authentic and approachable. At first, Renata only saw in him a friend, someone with whom to exchange ideas and advice about her projects, but little by little, a genuine connection began to form between them. One afternoon, after a particularly difficult class, Alejandro suggested that she go for coffee. You look a little exhausted, he said with a sympathetic smile. Renata, smiling, accepted his invitation. Over coffee, they talked about their dreams, their experiences, and eventually their injuries. Alejandro listened attentively, without judging or interrupting, and Renata felt comfortable sharing her story with him. Talking about her pain without fear, without pressure, was liberating. Over time, the encounters with Alejandro became more frequent, and Renata noticed that she felt something different about him. It was not a sense of dependency or a desperate need for affection, it was a peace and a simple joy that made her feel good about herself. Alejandro gave her the space she needed, respected her process, and that made it different from any relationship she had had before. One night, while they were having dinner in a small restaurant, Alejandro dared to tell her something that he had been wanting to express for a long time. Renata, I've seen how you've changed in these weeks. You're an amazing person, and I know what you've been through has been really hard, but I want you to know that I'll be here for whatever you need, in the present and in the future. Renata looked at him surprised, but also moved. Alexander's words resonated with her in a way she could never have imagined. It was as if, after so long of darkness, he finally saw a flash of light. That night, as she returned home, Renata felt that something inside her had changed. For the first time, she realized that she was capable of loving again, but not in the same way as before. She was a stronger woman now, more aware of her own worth, and she knew she didn't need anyone to feel complete. Alejandro was someone special, yes, but Renata understood that true love, the most important one, was the one she had found within herself. As the months went by, Renata began to see the fruits of her dedication. The ceramic pieces he made were gaining more and more attention. He had invested time and effort in perfecting his techniques, in creating unique pieces that reflected not only his skill, but also his history and his renewed strength. He decided to exhibit his works at a small local craft fair, and the response was overwhelmingly positive. That morning, seeing how people admired her pieces, Renata felt immense pride. Every vase, every plate, and every sculpture told a part of their journey, a struggle that had morphed into something beautiful and tangible. Sophia, who had been with her since early in the morning, smiled proudly, and Alexander, always present, looked at her with tenderness and admiration. "This is just the beginning, Renata," Alejandro whispered to her as they walked together among the rows of visitors. "You're incredibly talented, and the world is just beginning to discover it." Renata smiled back, feeling that her words went beyond a simple compliment. Since Alejandro had entered her life, everything seemed clearer, more serene. He did not try to change her or expect anything from her, he was only accompanying her on her journey, giving her the space and support she so desperately needed. She felt that, after all the pain, life was giving her a chance to rediscover love, but in a healthy and genuine way. One afternoon, after the fair, Renata and Alejandro sat on a bench in a nearby park. The trees formed a welcoming shelter around them, and the sound of leaves rustling in the wind filled the atmosphere with a peace that was difficult to describe. "Renata, I've never told you like that, but I feel lucky to have met you," Alejandro said, looking at her with a sincerity that disarmed all the defenses she still maintained. Renata felt her heart race. For months, she had tried to protect herself, afraid of opening up to anyone again. But with Alejandro, everything seemed different. "I didn't feel the urge to be someone I wasn't." He accepted her, with all her wounds and scars. "I feel lucky too, Alejandro," she replied softly. "After everything I went through, I never thought I would find someone to feel that way with again, in peace." Alejandro smiled and took her hand gently. "You don't have to say anything else. I just want you to know that I am here, and that I am willing to walk by your side, without haste, without pressure." Renata squeezed his hand, feeling how the warmth of that gesture filled her with a calm that she had rarely experienced. For the first time, she understood that she was beginning a new chapter, one where self-love and inner peace were her pillars. Days later, while organizing her small ceramics workshop, Renata received an unexpected call. She was the organizer of an art exhibition in the city, who had seen her pieces at the fair and wanted her to participate in the event. Surprised and excited, she accepted the invitation, without imagining that it would become a turning point in her life. Sophia was the first to receive the news, and her enthusiasm was contagious. "Renata, this is huge. An exhibition in the city means that your work is going to reach a lot more people. It's the recognition you deserve after so much effort," she told him excitedly. Renata felt a whirlwind of emotions, nervousness, gratitude, and even a little disbelief. She never imagined that her passion for ceramics would take her this far, especially after everything she had been through. But now he was there, facing an opportunity that not only validated his talent, but also his ability to rebuild himself and create something beautiful from his experiences. The day of the exhibition came faster than I expected. The night before, Renata could barely sleep, going over in her mind every detail, every piece she had worked on with so much love and dedication. Arriving at the event, he saw the lights illuminating his work, and felt a mixture of pride and gratitude. Seeing his pieces there, in a space where art was valued, reminded him how far he had come. Alejandro stood by her side, giving her silent and constant support, while visitors to the exhibition admired her work. In the distance, he heard someone comment on the authenticity of his pieces, on how they seemed to convey a deep and personal story. Renata smiled when she heard that, knowing that, although unknown to the public, her work spoke of her, her wounds and her healing. In the middle of the event, while enjoying a glass of wine, Alejandro approached her with a warm expression on his face. "You know, Renata, every time I see your works I realize that you are much stronger than I thought. You've transformed your pain into art, and that's something not many people manage to do," she said admiringly. Renata looked at him, feeling his words resonate within her. "Thank you, Alejandro. I don't think I've ever felt so complete, so at peace with myself," she replied, letting the truth of her words fill the space between them. It was then that, in the midst of happiness and pride, a familiar figure entered the room. It was Marcus. Renata saw him from across the room, and his presence puzzled her. He seemed lost, his eyes dull, as if the weight of his decisions was reflected in every step he took. Noticing Renata, he approached shyly, evidently affected by the atmosphere of success that surrounded her. Renata stood firm, not looking away, but also not giving in to sadness or anger. Marcus stopped in front of her, and in a hesitant voice, said, "Renata, I just wanted to congratulate you. I didn't imagine you'd get this far, that you would find something so beautiful after all." Renata nodded, accepting his words without rancor. "Thank you, Marcus. Sometimes, pain drives us to discover things that we didn't even know we had inside," she replied, with a calmness that surprised even her. Marcus looked down, visibly shaken. I made a mistake. I know. And to see what you've become, to see how you've grown, it makes me realize how much I've lost." Renata watched him for a moment, feeling a mixture of compassion and freedom. "I knew that there was no turning back, that what they once shared had been lost forever." But instead of holding on to resentment, he decided to release that last weight. "Marcus, there's nothing we can do anymore. We both made decisions, and those decisions led us down different paths. I chose to move on, and I hope you find the peace you need too." Marcus nodded, and after a final gesture of goodbye, walked away. Renata felt an unexpected release, as if with that farewell she was finally leaving behind all the weight of her past. At the end of the night, as the last visitors were leaving, Renata looked at her exhibition with deep satisfaction. He had closed an important chapter, not only in his relationship with Marcus, but also in his life. Now, she only had the future left, a future that she was ready to face with the same strength and self-love that she had cultivated in the past few months. After the exhibition, Renata's life took a new turn. His name began to be known in the local art world, and soon he began to receive invitations to participate in other events. Each new opportunity was a confirmation that she had done the right thing by following her passion, by transforming her pain into a creative force. However, external success was only part of the transformation that Renata was experiencing. Inside, peace and self-confidence grew with each step she took toward her own destiny. Alejandro, as always, was by her side at each of those events, but their relationship had grown in such a natural and solid way that they both shared a deep connection, based on respect and unconditional support. There were no hasty promises or imposed expectations, they simply enjoyed each other's company, without pressure. One afternoon, while they were in Renata's workshop organizing some of their pieces for a new exhibition, Alejandro broke the silence. "Renata, did you ever imagine that you would be here, living this moment?" he asked, looking at the sculptures she had created with so much effort. Renata paused for a moment, looking at her own hands that were now holding one of her favorite pieces, a small sculpture depicting the rebirth of a flower through cracks in the earth. "Not really. At some point I thought that my life was over, that everything that defined me had collapsed with the betrayal of Marcus and Carolina. But here I am, and every day that passes I feel more at peace with myself," she replied, with a serene smile. Alejandro nodded, silently admiring her. "That's what I love most about you, Renata. Your ability to transform pain into something beautiful, to not allow the past to limit you. That's a strength that few have," he said as he gently stroked his hand. Renata smiled and returned the gesture, feeling a warmth in her chest. "You have been a fundamental part of all this, Alejandro. You were there when I needed you most, without judging me, without trying to rush me. You let me be who I am, and for that I will always be grateful." Renata's words resounded in the silence of the workshop. Alejandro looked at her, and in his eyes there was a deep and genuine love, a love that did not need promises or grandiloquent words, only the certainty that they were both there for each other. The next day, while Renata was preparing the last details for a new exhibition, she received an unexpected letter. When he opened it, he discovered that it was Marcus's. Sitting in her workshop, she read each word carefully. In the letter, Marcus asked for forgiveness once again, but this time in a different way. He did not look for excuses or try to justify what he had done. He fully accepted his mistakes and acknowledged the pain it had caused him. "Renata, I know that nothing I say will change the damage I did to you, but I needed to tell you. Losing you made me see who I really am and how much I let go of a selfish search for something I didn't even know how to define. I see now, from this distance, that you were always the person who completed me, the one who taught me to value every detail of life. I'm sorry I didn't understand it before. Today I understand that the peace I was looking for abroad was always by my side, with you," Marcus wrote in the letter. Renata felt a mixture of emotions as she read. Part of her wanted to close that letter and not think about him anymore, but another, more compassionate part, understood that Marcus had also embarked on his own path of self-discovery and regret. For the first time, he felt that he could truly forgive him, not just in words, but in his heart. She knew that holding on to resentment would only tie her to the past, a past that no longer had a place in her life. That night, when Alejandro arrived at the workshop, Renata told him about the letter. Alejandro listened patiently, without interrupting her, just nodding from time to time. When she finished, he took her hand and said, "Renata, forgiving doesn't mean you forget what he did to you. It means that you no longer allow that pain to control you. If you feel like you're ready to let it go, go for it. Not for him, but for you." Renata nodded, understanding that Alejandro was right. That night, in an act of liberation, he burned the letter in the small courtyard of his house, watching Marcus's words turn to ashes. It was his way of leaving that stage of his life behind for good, of making sure that his future would not be tied to any shadow of the past. In the days that followed, Renata felt lighter, as if a weight she was carrying on her shoulders had finally disappeared. He devoted himself entirely to his workshop, preparing new pieces and planning the opening of his own ceramic studio. Alejandro supported her in every decision, encouraging her and helping her manage the most complicated details. They both knew that life together was full of possibilities and that they could build something beautiful from honesty and mutual respect. Finally, the day of the opening of the studio arrived. Renata had worked hard to make every corner of the place reflect her style and history. Upon entering, visitors were greeted by a small gallery that displayed some of his most iconic works, each with a short description about the meaning behind the piece. Sofia and Alejandro were there, supporting her as always, full of pride. Renata felt her heart fill with gratitude as she saw them both smiling, happy for her. With tears in her eyes, she thanked them for being by her side every step of her healing process, for not allowing her to get lost in pain, and for helping her find her way back to herself. That night, as she closed the doors of the studio for the first time, Renata took a moment to look at the place in silence. This wasn't just a study, it was the symbol of his resurgence, of everything he had achieved since the day he decided to get up and fight for his happiness. Despite all the trials and injuries, Renata had transformed into a stronger, more self-confident, and more complete woman. With a smile, she turned off the lights and walked out, knowing that although her journey had been arduous, each step had taken her exactly where she needed to be. Months passed, and Renata's ceramic studio became a greater success than she had imagined. What began as a way to heal her wounds became a haven of creativity and expression, not only for her, but also for everyone who visited her space. The pieces she produced, each unique and loaded with meaning, began to sell in a short time, and Renata's name became known in the artistic community. One afternoon, while organizing some of her new creations on the shelves, Renata received an unexpected call. She was a woman from an organization that supported women survivors of difficult and painful experiences. The woman explained that they had heard about her story and wanted to invite her to share her journey at an event to inspire other women who were also facing challenging situations. Renata felt a mixture of nerves and pride. She never thought her story could have that impact, but the idea of being able to help other people filled her with deep satisfaction. With a smile, she accepted the invitation, pledging to attend and share her story of overcoming and rebirth. In the days leading up to the event, Alejandro was a constant support. With his warm, reassuring presence, he reminded him how far he had come and how much he had grown. "Remember, Renata, this is your moment. Not only have you transformed your life, but now you can inspire others to do the same. It's an honor that few have," he told her as he hugged her. When the day of the event arrived, Renata was in front of an auditorium full of women of all ages, each with her own baggage of experiences and difficulties. He took a deep breath before he began to speak, and with surprising calmness, he began to tell his story. She talked about her marriage, about the betrayal that had changed everything, and about the pain that had brought her to the brink of despair. But he also spoke of how, in that pain, he found new strength. She recounted how she rediscovered ceramics, how that art helped her heal, and how each piece she created was a way to rebuild herself. As she spoke, she could see how the women in the auditorium were moved, some with tears in their eyes, others nodding their heads, connecting with her story in deep and personal ways. At the end of his speech, the auditorium erupted in applause. Renata felt a wave of gratitude and peace. She had shared her truth, her pain, and her healing, and in that moment she understood that she had not only managed to overcome her past, but had also given other women a small spark of hope. After the event, many women came to talk to her, thanking her for her words and expressing how much her story had inspired them. Renata felt that, for the first time, her pain had a greater purpose, one that went beyond herself. Alejandro, who had been watching everything from the back of the auditorium, approached her with a proud smile. "Renata, I'm impressed. Not only have you changed your life, but you're helping to change other people's lives. You're amazing," he said, hugging her affectionately. Renata looked at him tenderly and whispered, "Thank you for being with me on this journey, Alejandro. I don't know if I would have had the strength to get here without you by my side." In the following days, Renata felt that a new stage was beginning in her life. Her pottery classes began to attract more people, some of whom came looking for more than just learning a technique. They were looking for a space to heal, to express themselves and find their own way, just as Renata had done. Each day, as he opened his studio, he felt that he was not only teaching his students how to mold clay, but also how to discover the parts of themselves that were broken, and then rebuild them into something stronger and more beautiful. One afternoon, while preparing the studio for one of his classes, Alejandro appeared at the door, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers. "What are these flowers for?" asked Renata, surprised. Alejandro smiled, with that serene look that so reassured her. "They are for you. To celebrate how amazing you are and how far you've come. Every day you surprise me more, Renata, and I want you to know how grateful I am to be by your side." Renata hugged him, feeling a peace she had rarely experienced. Her relationship with Alejandro had grown naturally and solidly, and in him she found a sincere and deep connection. It was a love free from the wounds of the past, based on respect and mutual acceptance. "Thank you, Alejandro," he whispered, feeling that, for the first time in a long time, he had found the place where he belonged. That night, as she closed the studio after a long day, Renata stood at the door for a moment, staring up at the starry sky. She thought about everything she had been through, about the pain and tears, about the dark days when she thought she could never smile again. And yet, there she was, stronger than ever, living a life she hadn't even imagined for herself. Renata understood that life does not always give us what we expect, but it does give us what we need to grow. She knew that every hurt, every disappointment, and every trial had been an essential part of her journey to the woman she was today, strong, independent, and at peace with herself. With a smile on her lips, she closed the door of the studio and headed towards the home she shared with Alejandro, knowing that the future was a blank page, ready to be written with love, hope, and new beginnings. And so, Renata said goodbye to the past for good, leaving behind the shadows of what had been, to embrace the light of what she was now destined to be.